little backstory on my household. My grandfather built the house roughly 50 to 60 years ago, and it's been in the family since. It's a one-story, pretty basic house, but it's home. Anyway, I'm 18 and a guy. Not really important to this, but just so you know. 2 months ago, we were getting ready to go on our yearly 2-week trip to the UK. We live in Ireland, and I'm Irish, but my mom's English, so we go and visit family every year. While preparing to go to the UK, my mom's set of keys, which have everything on them, went missing. The house keys, car keys, shed, family friend's house keys, and keys to open the windows. I've never understood why locks are on the outside of the windows too, honestly. Anyway, so we searched high and low, but weren't able to locate them. Luckily, my mom had spare keys lying around, so we just made a new set. 5 people live in the house: my mom, me, my sister, and our nieces. My bedroom is at the front of the house, so I can see the car and the front door easily. And so this is where things start to go strange. A few nights before we were going to the UK, I heard the car unlocking and locking again, over and over. This was at like 2 a.m., mind you. I'm a night owl and was playing Horizon Zero Dawn on my PS4. Confused, I went to my window and saw no one. So I went back to my PlayStation, but it continued again for another 5 minutes. Shaken, I saved my progress and went to go to bed, but I texted my mom first. She didn't believe me and said it was because I was awake so late playing video games. Right. She wasn't concerned for some reason, despite someone clearly having taken the keys, because the only way someone could unlock and lock the car repeatedly without being seen would be with the key with the buttons on it, which is one of the keys that went missing. The following morning, I woke up at 3 a.m. and because my dogs were growling at my feet. Confused but more groggy and annoyed they'd woken me up, I told them to shut up and stop. But that was until I heard someone walking around the side of the house. Absolute chills ran up and down my spine as the walking stopped when the person heard my voice. I don't have an indoor voice and basically yelled at the dogs by accident. I don't like being woken up. I sat up and glanced up at my window, which was curtainless because I was replacing the curtain pole at the moment and didn't have it finished or up yet. So the darkness was just falling into my room. The outside porch light was on so I could see the car, but whoever this was on the other side of the wall behind my head. This continued until Sunday. Nothing happened that night, and when we went on holiday, the house minder didn't report anything. Family friends stayed over until a death in their family made them leave, so my sister came home from her boyfriend's to mind the house till we were home. She didn't report anything weird happening either, so the weird 2 to 3 a.m. mishappens faded from my mind, until a few nights ago when everything ramped up again. 4 a.m., my dogs were barking, growling at the end of my bed again, and I groaned trying to sleep. But I noticed there was more light shining in my window, so I sat up rather tired and frozen. The front door was wide open. My mom always locks it, and my sister was asleep in her room. Everyone was asleep. Terror washed down over me. I have a huge fear of being burgled. I have really bad anxiety issues, and this almost made me have a severe panic attack as I contemplated what to do next. Clicking my spaniel's leash to his harness, I edged from my room, through the hall and kitchen and into the living room. We have automatic lights now, so if you talk to the Google companion thing, it should turn on the lights. But the Wi-Fi was out, so was the power. Oh man. I started shaking because I realized how dark it was. My spaniel was a wuss, but I brought him out for moral support basically. But the second I heard the front door, he started growling. The porch light is one of those lights that isn't connected to the main house, so it turns on by itself. Same with the other porch one. So the only way those lights were on is if someone moved near the sensors. I rushed to lock the front doors. Did a small anxiety nervous dance jump I do when I feel like I'm gonna throw up from nerves. I quickly ran across the house into the washroom where our power box was, and it was switched off. Everything was. So I flicked all the switches back on and scurried to my room, basically dragging my on-edge dog with me everywhere. When I went into my room, I sat down on my bed and curled up in a ball, anxiety pains in my stomach, but my blood ran cold the second I heard soft taps on my window. Tap, tap, tap. The last tap was louder than the others, and I froze. The tapping continued, and whoever it was scraped clearly the keys on my window. It hasn't happened since, but I've been so anxious after arriving home from work each night that I'll meet someone outside my home. This was only 3 nights ago. My mom won't change the locks at all, and this is continuing. What do I do? A few years back, when I was either a sophomore or freshman in high school, I didn't have Wi-Fi in my household, so I would walk down a few blocks to the local library after hours and watch YouTube videos until I was all caught up with my subscriptions. Usually I'd be there from 10 p.m. to 1 a.m. After I was done, I'd leave and walk home. However, this night was a very different occurrence. As a very suspicious person and one who believes in the paranormal, I am susceptible to late-night paranoia. On this night, I was midway through a video when I felt, more than I heard, this booming bark. Initially terrified, I peeked around the corner of the library entrance for the source. Nothing was in sight, and this wasn't the bark of a normal dog. All bass, no treble, and it felt different. At this point, every single dog in the neighborhood erupted into a barking fit that lasted for about 5 minutes. Being terrified as I was, I ran across the street and barred myself behind a door leading to an apartment. I waited there with my handy knife at the ready for 20 minutes. I had planned to wait till dawn, but I just wanted to get home. So as I ran home, the barking of the dog seemed like it was following me. In my heart of hearts, I truly believe I had a close encounter with a hellhound. Safe to say, I paid for my own internet from that point on. When I was in my early teens, I had a fascination with divination, the occult, and spiritualism. Basically anything to offer some sort of proof that there is more to this reality than what we believe. This all started in the early 90s when I saw a Ouija board for sale in our local small-town grocery store. Needless to say, I bought it. I couldn't believe they actually sold these kinds of games. Mind you, I lived in a small town and grew up disconnected from a lot of the pop culture staples of that era. I would play the board often, mostly with my stepbrother Dan and stepsister Holly when they came to visit during the summer months and over the holidays. Both of them were considerably younger than myself, me being no older than 13 at the time. The board became an obsession of mine, even though over 95% of the time nothing would happen, or when it did move, we would receive short, nondescript messages. On one cold winter day, this was about to change. My siblings and I retreated upstairs in an attempt to play the board. We lit the usual candles and killed the lights. After a few attempts to summon a spirit, the planchette started to move. This time, it felt different. It glided with ease around the board and answered simple yes and no questions with great finesse. In disbelief, we took our fingers off the planchette. The moment we did so, the flame on the candle began to shrink dramatically. We quickly placed our fingers back on the planchette and the flame immediately came back to life. We then asked, "Where in the room are you?" The pointer spelled out, K-I-T-E, kite. We sat there confused for a moment until we realized that I had a kite mounted to the ceiling above our heads. At this moment, the kite began to flutter as if there was a slight breeze. We lived in a log cabin that did not have central air. There were no fans running, so this was quite odd. We continued playing and decided to ask, "We'd like to know our spirit guide's name." A very new agey question as I look back, so I asked, "What is my guide's name?" The board spelled out A-R-T-H-U-R, Arthur. Dan asked for the name of his guide and the board lettered out B-R-E-T, Brett. And finally, Holly asked hers and the board replied G-A-R-E-T-H, Gareth. We were all kind of shocked with the results and discontinued playing to go downstairs and tell my mother the information we just received. After doing so, she replied, "I don't know, look the names up in the dictionary." At the time, we thought this was pretty unhelpful advice, but reluctantly did. A dictionary probably isn't the best resource for looking up names, but this is before the internet, so I grabbed the dictionary off the shelf and began flipping through the pages. Searching the name Brett came up with a few uninteresting results. Next, I looked up Arthur. Not surprisingly, King Arthur, along with maybe a few other Arthurs, were on the list. I then proceeded to look up Gareth. When I did so, my jaw hit the floor. Gareth was King Arthur's nephew. I was completely dumbfounded. I knew at this point that the names we received probably weren't the actual names of our spirit guides. These were purposely crafted by something with a full awareness that we could or would look them up, draw a connection between the two. Now, before you go and assume my stepbrother and or sister pushed the planchette, keep this in mind. Dan has always had a learning disability. Even today, he still has difficulty spelling and uses voice to text because of it. I am 100% confident he couldn't have moved it. I am also 100% confident that neither of them at the time were well versed in the genealogy of Arthurian mythology. I have observed this with a skeptical point of view since the day it happened. This still remains as one of the few times the board actually moved, more or less provided with legible specific details. To this day, at the age of 39, I remain convinced that what we received was not from us, but from somewhere else, something that I believe knew full well that my mother was going to tell me to look it up. Before I tell you, the story here is some backstory of my family. We are Catholics, but none of us are super religious and none of us were praying before bed except me. When the story happened, I was 8, and the only way I learned about my religion was through holiday traditions. So when I was younger, I used to have an imaginary friend. I was maybe too old for imaginary friends, but I was an only child and didn't have a lot of friends to play with. When we moved to a new house, I got another friend. My new friend was a girl, and her name for this story, let's say, was Mary. None of my other imaginary friends had names, and her name was the same as my middle name. You would think that I was the one who named her since she had my middle name and I was 8, but I didn't name any of my toys, teddies, or imaginary friends, so she was weird for the start. She was also a little older than me, and she had a weird obsession with my mother. Mary would only appear when I was home, and she never left my room. After a while, Mary got more aggressive, and I remember not wanting to play with her. Mary would scream at me and say stuff like, "Your mother is not your real mother," and "I will have your mother." I would often run to my mother, scared of her, but my mother reassured me that it was all in my head. After we moved again, I never heard from Mary, and I never wanted to talk to her again. Some years later, I was talking to my grandma, and I asked her about my middle name. She said my middle name should not be used in a bad way. Mary was the name I was baptized with. She said Mary should be used when I'm in church or talking to God. She told me also about my mother, who had a baby with another man 2 years before she met my father. My mother was not married, so the baby had a bad start on life in the name of God. The baby lived for only 4 days, and they named this baby Mary. I'm not really a religious person these days, but I felt compelled to write this story on here because I walked past the place. All this happened yesterday and felt other people should know about the unexplainable event I was put through. Before we begin, I need to explain some things. I was about 17 years old when this all happened. I was involved in a religious group that called themselves Christians. The group was more of a cult. The leader of the group was a woman, and the majority of the people in the team were her children. The other 6 of us that weren't related to her were just high school kids that were looped into their team. I know, this team was definitely a cult, but I promise that isn't even the scariest part of the story. Let's call the leader of this team Mary. It was a cold winter evening when Mary called the whole team to meet over Facebook Instant Messenger, which was pretty normal. We all felt obligated to respond to her request because she would always assure us that she could speak to God and knew what he wanted. So here we were all meeting at her house as usual, which was a Victorian-style home in the middle of a country town in Idaho. She told us that she had some exciting news, that the city was going to let us rent the old town's high school for meetings. I would be lying if I said I wasn't actually excited to hear this, but upon us all arriving to the old building, my face went white. The old building was huge, with tall oak trees lining its perimeter and lifeless ivy vines crawling over the red-bricked building. She then explained to us that we needed to bless the new building if we're going to be using it for God's work. With Mary turning the keys and opening the overly tall door, all 12 of us were met with colder air than what was outside and the smell of old books. One by one, we entered the building and took out our phones for lights. Kevin, one of our older members, went off and found the breaker to turn on all the lights. Honestly, the lighting made the building seem 100% more haunted. The lights were all dim and produced many shadows all along the long corridors. Directly in front of the doors were 2 doors that led into a stage room. The windows of this room were beautiful, almost from the floor to the ceiling with a rounded top. The movie theater-style chairs were so old they were made of wood bolted into the floor. Mary gathers us on stage and tells us we will be breaking off into groups of 3 and praying over the school. I was put into a group with 2 other guys, Nick and Jesus. All the other groups had adults in them, but ours did not. So as groups began to head out the stage room one by one, my group was the last to go. Like I said at the time of this story, I was religious and so were the guys in my group, so we began to pray over the building, saying things like, "Anything or anyone not in God's kingdom is not allowed here," as we walked down the Hogwarts-like hallway. The prayers of the other groups grew faint as we all headed into different wings of the school. As we got to the end of the hallway, Nick pointed to a door and said that we haven't prayed over that room yet. So Nick, being the most darling one out of Jesus and I, he flung it open to reveal a staircase. Mary had instilled into us that fear is from the devil and how we shouldn't give in to it, so naturally we made our descent. The air grew colder and surprisingly the basement was lit quite well. The orange streetlights from outside gave the room enough light for us to see this newfound room. It was a kitchen of some sorts, with a long and wide room with tables and chairs, almost like a cafeteria. Suddenly, Jesus slowly walked over the window and said, "Oh, look, it's snowing." And then that's when I noticed the flies. There were 10 to 20 flies all along the wall with windows, both living and dead on the window ledge. Our prayers stopped, and for a split second everything seemed to freeze, the snow falling outside, the other groups walking around upstairs. Me having read the Bible as I was instructed to by Mary, and knowing she would say something similar, I said, "Lord of the Flies, you are not welcome here." Suddenly we all heard a loud falling sound as if though a large chair fell over the wooden floor right above our heads, followed by a blood-curdling scream. I instantly felt a burning sensation on my left arm, and when I looked down, there were these 3 scratches going down my forearm. Nick, Jesus, and I looked at my arm with faces of pure terror, and then again, a woman screaming right above our heads. We ran up those stairs and back into the stage room to find another horrifying scene. The team was all circled around a girl named Katie. Katie was on her hands and knees screaming and making a rocking motion with every scream she let out. Mary's face was white and so was Kevin's. She then looked at all of us, including her kids, and told us all to leave the building immediately. We all ran out of the school, and about 30 minutes later they brought Katie out sobbing. They explained to us that a demon must have been provoked and then entered the weakest person in the building, that being poor little horse-riding Katie. Mary also used my burning scratches as proof she was being possessed. Needless to say, I stopped going to their meetings, and from what I heard, they continued to have demonic activity in that building until they were forced to leave the school. The sign I saw in the school yesterday said that they were going to repurpose the building for a child care center. This story takes place in the summer of 2017. My name is John. I live in a rural part of Alabama, but choose to work in the city. The drive is about 45 minutes or so, depending on traffic. However, by the time I pick up my son from the sitter, get dinner, and get home, I've been in the car about 1.5 hours. My house is surrounded by trees, and the neighbors are few and far between. It can be pretty lonely living here, but I enjoy the privacy. One evening, I pulled in my driveway and noticed something odd. The doors on my storage shed were wide open. I told my son to sit in the car as I got out to investigate. I didn't see anything missing and closed the doors back. I know the wind had not blown them open because it has 2 latches you have to open in order to get it open. The next day, I looked around and much to my dismay, 2 weed eaters along with a few other garden tools were missing. I know I should have contacted the police, but I knew there wasn't much they could do at that point. Throughout the week, I had some time off and decided to tackle some yard work that I needed to get done, which included cutting down a medium-sized tree that had grew next to my house. Once I cut it down, it took everything I had to move it to the edge of my property just inside the woods. I planned on cutting it up another day. Fast forward to the next Friday night, I left work at 7 p.m., picked up my son, and we arrived home at 8:30 p.m. As I pulled in the driveway, my son and I noticed something lying across the driveway. It looked as if though a tree branch had fallen across my driveway. As I drove up to it, I thought to myself, there are no trees over my driveway. Once I looked towards the base of the tree, my heart sank to the bottom of my stomach. It was the tree that I had cut down. I had put it clear on the other side of my property until I could cut it up. I recognized the markings from my chainsaw. I didn't know what to do. My son and I sat there in silence for at least 5 minutes. I rolled the driver and passenger window down just an inch and listened to hear if anyone was out there. I heard nothing. I then realized in order for me to get in my house, I would have to move the tree. I told my son I was going to get out and move it just enough so we could get past and I could lock the doors. If anything happens, he could use my phone to call the neighbor who lived the closest. I darted out of my car and moved the tree slightly and raced back to the car. I was terrified. Luckily, my son was on the ready to unlock the doors for me to get back in. I drove towards my house and we got in safely. I didn't sleep that night. The next day, I woke up to find the tree was moved again, this time a few feet behind my car. To this day, I am still baffled at who could have done this or what their intentions were. Next time, I will be smarter and call the police. I do have another question that I can't answer. How did someone know where I put the tree after I cut it down? Whoever had done this had to have been watching me. I had put the tree in the woods, and that thought alone is enough to keep me up some nights. I live in a town called Casper, Wyoming. I was really young when this happened, maybe 7 or so I'll try to recount this as accurately as possible. I have 4 cousins who are all siblings of each other. I'll call them C, L, B, and J. Now, my cousins are unruly to say the least. They kind of do whatever they want, and their parents, my aunt and uncle, have a very freestyle way of raising them. This happened a while ago. This was in the house before the last that my family lived in. Sorry if that sounds a little strange. Which happened to be a relatively short car ride away from my cousin's house. My sister and I were playing the Wii in our living room when my dad came downstairs and told us to get our coats on, that our uncle, we'll call him D, needed our help. We all hopped in my dad's truck and started driving. I remember that my little sister and I tried questioning what was going on, but all my dad would say was, "None of your business." Because, of course, this was adult business that we children had no business meddling in. So, after a slightly longer drive due to the snow and road conditions, we arrived at my uncle's house and were rushed inside. I immediately sought Elle, who at the time was like my best friend. She seemed fairly shaken up, with tears streaking down her face and her hands shaking. I asked her what was going on, more specifically why our dads were panicking and getting out their guns, and helped her calm down a bit so that I could understand what she was trying to say through her tears. Basically, Elle told me that she and my aunt were cleaning in the living room when her mom looked out of their glass screen door. I don't know why their front door was open, and saw a man standing in the front yard. Apparently, this man was wearing only jeans, a pair of sneakers, and a t-shirt. He had no gloves or coat, which immediately struck my aunt as odd since it was the middle of winter in Wyoming. We can easily get 8 inches of snow, and the wind is often brutal, so anyone who doesn't have a coat on will freeze to death. He was just standing there, watching them, not really doing anything but that, and after finding that Elle and my aunt had noticed them, smiled. My aunt sent Elle away and pulled out a BB gun from the closet that she was standing next to. Even after pointing a gun at the man standing in her front yard, he kept smiling and didn't move. She wasn't sure of his intentions or if he was going to hurt her kids, and she was scared. Thankfully, my uncle came home and scared him off. Though he didn't actually see the man, my aunt told him that he ran off when my uncle pulled up in his truck. Shaken, they called my dad. My mom, my aunt, my 4 cousins, my sister, and I all stayed inside while my dad and my uncle assessed the property. Since it was snowing, they could see the places where the man had been standing, but he appeared to have walked up to the house from the street, which had been recently plowed, so there were no footprints. We concluded that our cousins could all come and stay with us in case the man returned, and they went home the next day. I only recently found out a detail from my dad, though, that he and my uncle went back to the house the next morning, only to find fresh footprints around the entire house, apparently stopping at each window. There were no signs of a break-in, and the police did little to help, save for telling them to call back if something like this happens again. This happened to me when I was around 7. For a bit of context, I am now over 21 years old, born and raised in the capital city of Lima, Peru. English is my second language, so even though I'm good enough, it will always be a struggle to make it sound completely natural. After a family meeting, my dad took me, my younger brother, and my cousin, same age as me, to a park so we could all play together before we had to part ways. I'm pretty sure my mom stayed at the party, although the details are a tad fuzzy. What I do know, though, is that at the time my cousin and his family were moving to the US. We were really tight back then, and many years would pass before we had the chance to ever meet again as fully grown adults. It was kind of a difficult time for both of us. Anyway, my dad took us all to a park close to the house the family meeting was being held at. This part of Lima is really something else geographically. The city as a whole takes a huge 200-meter dip that leads onto a beach down below. Way above the beach is both the park and the rest of the city. If you want to get a more accurate depiction, just look up Costa Verde Lima on Google and you'll see what I mean. It was a summertime sunset. My brother went with my cousin to get an ice cream, and I stayed with my dad sitting on a bench, just watching the afternoon fading away. In the distance, however, I saw something. There was a huge black line hovering over the ocean, ominously floating above the horizon sea line. Now at first I remember thinking it was some sort of odd bridge, but it couldn't be. The thing didn't have any pillars or cables that would prevent it from falling down. Not only that, but it didn't lead anywhere or was connected to anything. It was just there. If I had to guess, it was at least 4 stories tall and could easily have been larger than a kilometer in length. The best way I could possibly describe it is imagine a big black line drawn on MS Paint, just a blank spot in the middle of the sky. I was a bit shaken, yet I wasn't running nor screaming. I just stared at it, wondering if it was really there. I never felt I was in danger, just very confused. I asked my dad if he could see it. He told me yeah and replied saying something like, "That's so weird." Even as a kid, I knew he was lying. The weirdest part is that I clearly remember some other people looking at the sunset and pointing it out, yet most people weren't. The thing didn't say anything, didn't communicate or do anything. It was just there. Even when we all got in the car, I could still see it, but no one else in my family could, not my brother nor my cousin. We left that day. I couldn't stop thinking about it till I fell asleep. I came back a couple of times to that park until we moved further away from that part of town. Even now as an adult, I sometimes go there looking for it, wanting to see it once again. I don't know what that was. I love everything weird and paranormal, but at the same time, I'm someone who is into it just for fun. I don't really believe any of it, and that same logic applies to ufology. I used to remember it so vividly, though, so closely, so accurately. Memories faded with time, though. Most of that precious detail is gone. Not unlike a dream, but it wasn't. With loss of memory came doubt. I keep trying to convince myself that it was a hallucination, a trick of my mind, but I know it wasn't. I know it was real. I've never seen a UFO recording or something like this, nor have I ever heard anyone talking about this kind of spacecraft anywhere else. But was it a spacecraft? Could you even record it? I honestly want to hear your thoughts on this one. Has anyone else ever seen something like this? My cousin went on to become a military man, is now in Afghanistan, I believe. I brought this up a couple of times before he left again, but I don't recall if he's actually seen it or not. I'm just really eager to hear what he has to say when he comes back. In many ways, my relationship with him kind of faded away like the memories of this event. But thank you all for reading. This story occurred in the fall of 2016. I would say it around November, but honestly I can't remember. I was in the 8th grade when the story took place, and I had never had a paranormal encounter. That is until this night. It was a Friday night, and I decided to have a friend over. For the sake of privacy, we will call her Nina. We decided to have a sleepover, like any teenage girl would do, and we ordered a pizza. The pizza guy estimated the time to be around an hour, and we honestly had nothing else to do, so we decided to go for a walk, even though the sun was already setting. The way my neighborhood is set up, there is a steep hill behind my house. It was a heck of a workout, but we decided to walk it anyways. To get to this hill, there is a little hill with a street light that you have to climb. There are only 2 street lights on my street, so the majority of the area is dark. Trust me, this will come into play later in the story. Nina and I walked about halfway up the hill until I started to complain about how cold it was. It was already dark, and it was the middle of fall, so it was pretty chilly. Nina agreed, but I could tell she was slightly annoyed, and we began to walk down the dark hill. I remember how quiet it was that night, almost too quiet, especially with my house being surrounded by woods. We passed the first street light when I began to feel uneasy, like we were being watched, as cliche as that sounds. But I ignored the feeling, playing it off as I was paranoid and being a baby, so we continued to walk. But the feeling didn't leave. In fact, it grew stronger. We were around the point of the second street light when I decided to turn around in hopes of satisfaction. Although my feeling of uneasy was quickly explained, in the light of the first street lamp there was a woman, a shadowy woman. You couldn't make any details to her body besides the shape. She was riding a bike, except she was still as could be, watching us walk. This woman's hair was so messy. If you have ever seen the movie Lights Out, she looked like the shadow woman in the movie that came out when the lights went off. Nina hadn't stopped when I did, so I began to jog up to her. I whispered, "Keep your head down." She looked at me very confused, then she stopped and looked behind us too. When she stopped, she then quickened her pace. I assumed that she saw this woman too. As we walked with our heads hung down low, I heard the gears of a bike driving close to us. At first it was quiet, then it got louder. I didn't look till the sound had suddenly stopped. I looked up and saw nothing. No bike or woman anywhere to be in sight. I asked Nina where the woman had went, but she just looked confused and asked, "What woman?" The rest of the night I would hear loud bangs or odd sounds from my house, but I never saw the woman again. My family as well as Nina's still don't believe me when I say I saw a woman. Even now, as a sophomore in high school, they still make fun of me. I know what I saw. I don't know what it was, but I do know what I saw, and I never walk in that dark anymore. I'm an 18-year-old girl from a small town in Norway called Halden. Just to set the scene a little bit, the gym I go to is a big building near the road. It's 3 floors and each floor has different themes. Like on the floors, weights, one is cardio, and so on. So you have to have a key card to get in, and every time someone swipes their card at the door to get in, it registers who the card belongs to. I go to the gym almost every day. I don't like to work out when there is a lot of people there, therefore I train late. At this time, I always went there between 11 o'clock or midnight. This has been a regular routine for me for months now. I started to notice this guy always being there before me or coming in like 5 to 10 minutes later than when I got there. I have to point out, even though the gym is big, there are barely people there at nighttime, like 2 to 3 at most, so I was often here alone. If not, the guy was there. I started to notice that he always stared at me, and I can't deal with people staring at me. Also, too shy to comment anything of it to the person staring, so I just kept on doing my thing. It was like this for a couple of weeks or so, and I started to be more nervous to go to the gym alone. I felt like he was a guy who really couldn't hurt me, but still could easily give me the creeps. He was quite skinny, tall, and had a really kind of creepy vibe to him either way. One night I was walking up the stairs towards the front door of the building to swipe my card, and I noticed something or someone next to the bushes. I knew that this guy rode a bike because I had seen him leave on multiple occasions. Surely enough, there he was, lurking in the bushes and staring at me. At first he saw me notice him. He quickly biked off. I just brushed this off and thought he was being an idiot, a creepy idiot. This is where the creepy stuff happens. As I mentioned, there are 3 floors. I work my way down the floors every time. He was here again, going everywhere I went. I tried to go back and forth several times and he kept following me and staring at me. There also was a second guy in the gym this night, which made me feel safer, but sadly he left before I did. So now it was only me and him alone. I went up to run for 10 minutes to finish my workout, and here I have to set the scene again. The boys' showers are in a door behind some sort of shower curtain to divide the cardio room and the showers. I cannot see behind the curtains or in the boys' shower area, so for me to see anything there, someone would have to remove the curtains themselves. Anyways, I was just done with my cardio, started walking towards the girls' locker room, when I looked to my left, only to see him standing there, completely nude, with only a hat on his head and his hands to cover his privates. He stared at me while I was in shock and ran to the locker room. I panicked and stayed in there for 10 minutes just wondering what had just happened. I know it sounds almost hilarious. It kind of is, but oh my god, did that shock and scare me. I don't know what that guy's intentions were. And who does this? On my way out from there, I glanced back to where he was standing and when I saw him the first time, and surely he was still there. Same position, naked and same creepy eyes staring at me. I decided to contact the gym, and the owner called me a week later to talk about the incident. Apparently this guy was up to no good. He had stolen a card from a boy I actually knew and used it for several months. The owner of the gym wanted to catch him when he was there, so they, meaning the owner and 2 cops, checked when the card was logged in and went there to have a little chat with him. When they got there, he was on his way out. He saw them and booked it right away. They didn't end up finding him that night, but he got banned from all the gyms in my town for this. Back when I was in middle school, I loved to play video games. Honestly, going on Xbox Live was like another life to me. I could meet many new people, including boys, which honestly made me feel great as I wasn't popular in middle school. So anyways, one of the many video games I would play was Minecraft. Cringy, I know. So when I played Minecraft, I would mostly play on servers. For those of you who don't play video games or know what a server is, it's a place where various people can join and play. So I met many new people through these servers, and I'm still friends with some of these people years later. So I met this one guy who we will call Jake. Jake honestly was a cool guy to play video games with. He was funny and really good at the game most of the time. Although he was creepy at times, I won't lie. He would make lots of sexual comments towards me, such as talking about locking me up and doing things to me. As messed up as that sounds, I just ignored it, being the naive 12-year-old I was. Heck, at times, he would even act upon it in the game, such as when he would play Minecraft, he would give me potions, making me unable to move, and he would pretend to do things to me. Still, I ignored this. I had other guy friends from Xbox as well who were all cool. We all used the app Kick to text each other. On Kick, you were able to have profile pictures, and I made mine as a selfie of me. This is important later on. So Jake also had Kick and would text me on there, and he would always make comments about how pretty I looked in the selfie. Frankly, I didn't get red flags or that from it. I thought it was sweet almost. I realize how dumb I am now. So one day Jake recommended that we should Skype and we could play Minecraft together on his world. I agreed, but had my friend Lana join the call in world. So Lana and I added him to our call as we were already on the world with him. "Hey," his voice boomed through the call. Right off that bat, you could tell his voice was extremely deep, and he claimed to be only 11. His voice was raspy as well. He sounded like a grown man, and I'm pretty sure Lana picked up on what I was thinking as well. We just continued to play the game. I would mess with Jake a bit, saying he sounded like an old perv or something along those lines. Keep in mind, they were all just jokes, and I would even clarify with him that they were only jokes, and he would laugh along. While playing, I got really snackish, so I went downstairs to the kitchen to get some cold pizza. When I left Lana and Jake in the call together. I came back up the steps and read the call. 2/3 of the people were in the call, meaning Lana left. I didn't stress about it. I just thought her phone had died or something. I opened Kick on my phone and saw that Lana had texted me. "I left the call. You should too." He read off my address, and honestly, I'm pretty terrified of him. "Hey, I'm back. What is going on with Lana? What's she talking about?" I laughed because I thought she was joking. "Talking about what, Samantha?" I felt my heart sink. See, many of the people I played with did know my real name, but never called me by it. They would always call me Fun, my username. Why was he calling me by my real name? That you tracked down her address? I could feel my voice shaking with fear. Well, you guys called me a perv, and you shouldn't have done that. Samantha, you live in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. His voice was almost filled with hatred. I hung up the call immediately, beginning to cry in panic. He read off my address. My idiot self decided to text him, though, saying that wasn't my address or some nonsense like that. He responded saying he could fly out to where I live at that exact moment. At this point, I was sobbing and apologizing for my jokes I made earlier. I was terrified. He complied, but I ended up blocking him. A few years down the road, one of my Xbox friends told me that Jake kept that selfie of me and a video of my voice, and he still has it to this day. I'm just glad I'm safe, and that I never met Jake. It was roughly anywhere from 2:37 a.m. to 3:20 a.m. in the morning. Lucky for me, I was chilling on the small castle bed that belonged to my little sister and was covered in pillows and a few stuffed animals. I wished to be in my soft bed upstairs, watching Scream, but I was in the living room on my phone. I gave a quick glance over at my little sister, sprawled out all over the twin-sized bed, fast asleep, slightly snoring. I gave a quick glance at the TV and thought to myself, so much for a movie marathon. I just keep replaying Mean Girls, and I haven't even paid attention to the movie at all, before hearing a soft voice coming from the huge sliding glass window on my right. "Hey," the soft voice spoke. I froze. I knew it wasn't the movie because the end of the credits of the movie were slowly rolling in silence. I was going to blast the TV and ignore it until I realized that the sliding glass window was open, only allowing the warm summer night air to come inside. The hot house leaving a thin screen door between me and this thing outside. "Hey," the voice said a bit louder. Another chill went down my spine. I felt tears peeking through my eyes, and I wanted to scream for someone to help me in my helpless and exposed state. "Hey," the voice said in a nearly sing-song tone. I gulped hard. This voice belonged to a male. I took a shaky breath and glanced down at my phone. Now at this point, someone might be asking why I just didn't look out the window and see who it was, and there are 3 reasons why I didn't do this. Number 1, my body could physically not move at all. All I could do was move my shaking hands and blink, and that was it. Number 2, there was a light on, and all I could see was the reflection of the dimly lit room. And number 3, if I looked out the window and saw a man trying to break into my house, the place I thought could shield me from the outside world, those walls were being penetrated by an unknown force. So I glanced back down on my phone, pressing buttons and forcing myself not to move anything besides my shaking hands. If this person is talking right now, they are trying to get my attention, and they can see me, and I refuse to give them that satisfaction of seeing me afraid and vulnerable in that state. Eventually, I opened the app Instagram, and thank God that they added that feature to see who's active. I saw one of my friends who was active and started to message them everything I told the person. I told him where I was in my living room. Eventually, I asked him if I can call him, and by the grace of God, he said yes. Now, this part of the story gets very foggy. I was on the verge of having an anxiety attack, screaming on the phone, sleep-deprived, and just trying to protect my baby sister somehow. I called him and, in a hushed tone, grabbed my phone and my remote control and jumped over both beds in one swift movement, hiding from anything standing behind that thin screen. I tried to wake up my little sister, pleading with her to go to my mother's bedroom and sleep in her room with a baseball bat, but she was sleepy. It was late, and she didn't want to leave the warm bed after that. After that, I failed to put on another movie, practically shaking during this time. All I could hear was my heart thumping, taps and scratches and footsteps on the floor and windows of my backyard. My dog, who was an 8-month-old basset hound, was moving around, head slightly tilted, as if though she was listening for something, and that nearly made me crap myself. From 3:27 to 6 a.m., I was on the phone with my friend, looking up how to protect yourself from an intruder and similar things. I don't have much to write about, but all I can remember is passing out at about 7 a.m. and clutching my baseball bat tightly. I woke up at 1:27 p.m. The first thing I did was that I grabbed my baseball bat and my dog's leash and ran into the backyard, interrupting my grandparents eating lunch by themselves, wearing a pink and red Hello Kitty shirt that was too big on me with black, purple, and yellow lightning striped pajama shorts, holding my tiny dog who is confused and just wants food. I checked everywhere in the backyard. All I could think of was screaming like a maniac, ready to beat the crap out of the crackhead who tried to hurt me, my dog, and my baby sister. I never found that person who tried to break into my backyard, and even as I write this, in a hotel room miles away from my house, I still get chills, but if you're still out there, I never want to see you or hear your raspy voice ever again. Hey friends, thanks for listening. Be sure to subscribe and click that notification bell to be alerted of all future narrations. If you got a story, be sure to submit them to my subreddit, r Let's Read Official, and give and receive feedback from the community, and maybe even hear the story featured here on the channel. And grab early access to all future narrations for just $1 a month on Patreon, and maybe even pick up some Let's Read merch on Spreadshirt.com. Links in the bio. Thanks so much, friends, and I'll see you again soon.